Our next speaker is waiting since few minutes. So we have Mr. Yuli from Institute of Mountain Hazards and Environment, and he's going to talk towards a green and resilient Silk Road. Wow. Okay.
Thank you for the introduction. The slide is popping up. No, that's not me, apparently. Yeah, sure. Okay, my name is Lei Yu. I'm from Chinese Academy of Sciences. I work at the Institute of Mountain Hazards and Environment. So our focus will be mostly on the natural hazard, disaster, and the risk mitigations. So for the past, I think 60 years, our institute have been work from in China and the South Asia, including part of Europe. We have partners from all over the world who mainly on the disaster, and we have conduct several successful examples for the hazard case treatment. Yeah. Today here, I'm gonna introduce one of the recent program we have been conducting for the past few years, led by our institute. So this presentation concludes the research funding from a large group. We have international partners from over 16 countries. So I will begin with, how does this work? It doesn't work? Okay. Okay. A brief background of what I'm talking about. For the Silk Road, we are talking about this large area basically contain of Asia, Africa, Europe. This area I think covers almost 100 countries with 4.4 billion people. So with these kind of large areas, when we talk about natural disaster and risk, this is what we see. Every country have different status of social and economic status. So if you look at the East China, part of India and Europe, this is where most of the population concentrated, and this is where the higher economic development. But if you look at from another perspective, you will see this is the distribution of natural hazards what we have. And this is only just the relevant one with record and report. So let's look at this area. This is where the Silk Road mainly covered. So we have frequently occurrence of natural hazard in this area. But our study, we have to make a mapping on this to see what kind of disaster we are actually facing. We have drought, we have earthquake, we have geohazards, we have the frozen and torn, and we have flood. So if we are facing this kind of situation, what exactly you are looking at? So this is 2008, the Wenchuan earthquake, which caused almost 90,000 casualties. And we have the typhoon in Philippines. This is happened just right after the Christmas, caused thousands of homeless. Very sad story. And in addition, we have the Indonesian tsunami affect over 14 countries. We have the Indian flood, which is a transboundary affecting India and Nepal. And we always suffer from drought, especially for African. We have millions of occurrence. And this is the Nepal earthquake. I think just now we have heard about it. And in addition, of course, China. China is a mountain country. We have 2/3 of the land in mountain areas. And each year we have roughly like 100 million people affected by those kind of landslide, debris flows. So let's look at some numbers. The number of disaster events is keep increasing since the past 100 years, and we have keep increasing economic loss. So if we do a comparison of the Silk Road countries and the world average, if you do the disaster loss against the GDP, you will see the Silk Road countries is almost twice the world average. And this thing goes worst for death tolls. So in some part of the Belt and Road countries, we have almost 10 times the world average in terms of casualties. So that's how bad the situation it is for us to look at. So if we take another look at the numbers, this is the education investments in the Belt and Road countries. We find half of the countries, their education investment is lower than the world average. And more to that is the research investment. We have more than half, 60%. That is lower than the world average. So we do not have enough investment in education and in the research funds. So that is bad influence in terms of the resilience. So what kind of challenge we are facing in this area? Lack of data, of course. under climate change, we don't know what kind of the disaster response to that. And we always don't have enough disaster risk assessment conducted, and we cannot have affordable mitigation technology, and we lack of the information sharing and coordination. So my topics will cover on the item C, D mostly. So what we are dealing with this, we had this program we call SiDDR, Silk Road Disaster Risk Reduction. We are having 5 working groups, work from different angles of the natural hazards. We have our steering committee. These are they are from scientists to engineer, from the social scientists, of course, and as well I will have the marketing people. We have all kind of disciplines in our teams, and we have partners all over the world to work on these vast areas. So to begin with, I think to understand the disaster, we always know there are some triggering mechanism, and there are physical process. That is how disaster moves. And when it encounters with our settlements, that's where the vulnerability comes in. With these two themes, we have the risk, and we always talk about risk reductions. And what kind of risk reduction we are talking about? There are 3 phases. One is before the disaster. Before the disaster, we have the monitoring, early warning, and we have the education on people to increase their capability of resist that. And this is how we prepare for disaster. We try to cut the chain. And during the disaster, the most important is the emergency response. And of course, we have the post-disaster events. That's where the reconstruction comes in. And these 3 phases is where the theory and the technology and the governance have to come together and work as a disaster risk reduction. So this is a perfect example of the how to identify disaster risk. So basically, we have to identify the elements. Firstly, is we have to see what kind of hazard we are actually facing off. We have the volcano, we have the landslide, debris flow, flood, coast hazards. And secondly, we have to see what kind of element is exposed to risk. We have roads, we have cities, we have village, we have bridge, we have all kind of infrastructure and farmlands are there. So when we have these 2 things, when they come together, we know there's some risk. Plus exposure, when they come together, we know there's risk, and there we have to do something about it. So that's the concept. So in terms of the natural hazard, what do we know? Okay, we always know there is earthquake, volcano, we call it endogenic force. And of course, we have the exogenic force. So these 2 kind of action they act alone, they can trigger all kind of natural hazard already. And especially when they come together, we have the threshold is much lower, means we can trigger those landslide, those hazards much easier. And this is where the nature scientists come in to study how it is triggered, how it is moved. In addition to that, when the natural hazard occurred, we know it have to become encounter to us, become a disaster. So we have the formation, we have the dynamic process, and eventually we have the interaction of humans. That's where we want to address the disaster issues. So I will skip to the third thing is, this is the disaster risk assessment we try to carry out in the Silk Road regions. The thing I want to emphasize is that we think for this kind of area, we have to come to do the assessment in terms of 4 scales. The first scale we call global scale, that's a level 1. We're dealing with resolution of 1 to 10 kilometers. This is generally just for identify the global risk condition and to support international DR works. So the second resolution we're dealing with, we're talking about 100 meters resolution. We call it regional scales. This is whenever there's a country try to plan for the strategy of collaborative disaster response or the national disaster risk zonation. And the next, it will be a much refined resolution, that's 1 to 5 meters, we call local scale. When we conduct local scale, I will show you an example. This is to identify the disaster influence and the support urban planning, especially after we're talking about the post-disaster reconstruction. And the final one we call engineering oriented. This is very refined assessments. That is, we serve for any engineering and infrastructure works to support their design and make sure the safety operation to reduce the long-term cost. This is the atlas. It will be published by end of this year. This is all we have consolidated all our study into this with explanation notes. And I will show you some examples. So this is what I talk about, the global scale risk assessment. This is a risk integrated risk, means we have conducted the geo risk, the ocean, and the flood, everything together. And this is kind of what kind of the risk distribution you will have. We'll see almost 30% of high risk is occurred in this region. And we have climate zonation to tell you what kind of background you are looking at. We are doing for single disaster like earthquake, geohazards, flood, drought, and altogether. This is just showing off how the earthquake condition is. If you are living in the red area, you should be cautious of that. And to connect with the social scientists, we have done the risk of this is the casualty, risk of casualty, risk of public health, and the risk of economic loss. So they are related closely together. So for the next level, what we are talking about, this is at the regional level. This is we call the China-Pakistan economic corridors. So we do a risk of assessment of this area. The idea is to help the country to planning any infrastructure, to tell them what you are looking at if you are planning roads, hydropower stations, any kind of instructions. And the next level you will see is this is for more like a local skill. That's for infrastructure planning. This is the China-Nepal highway, we call our Nickel Highway. We did a risk assessment and to tell people if you want to do the upgrade works, which is ongoing now in the design process, which are the places you try to avoid, where you should reselect the roads, and this is how we support the local development. And the last we will call the engineer-oriented disaster risk reduction assessment. So the first to the top right, this is the debris flow events happening in 2010. We call Qingping town. So half of the town is wiped out by this debris flow, and every building is buried. So after that, the government decided to reconstruct this whole town. But one thing we need to do is we have to do the risk assessment of what's going to happen if they build the new town. So we conduct the risk assessment to tell people what kind of risk you are having. If you are doing a replanning, where you should locate the building, where you should locate the evacuation place. And I will show you this is the new Qingping town, which has been complete in 2006. And since then, I think we never suffer from any natural hazards. And I think this is a very good example of what we call risk-informed planning or risk awareness planning. So besides risk assessment, we developed technology of early warning system because this is actually tell people what you should be warning of. We have the monitoring system, transmission, and the data processing and the warning. So what we have been working on this is we work with our Italian partners. We combine the LiDAR and the ground radar. We have a remote monitoring technology which can tell people tell the risk from high. And locally, we develop very cheap technology. That is like the flow velocity monitoring. As long as you have a camera, we can tell you how fast the flow is traveling. It's either debris flow, and we have the density monitoring. This is tell you what kind of hazard you are dealing with. You are dealing with flood. You are dealing with debris flow. We are dealing with landslide. That's important when you give out the warning information because they travel different lengths and different speed. So we have implemented this in one of the town in West China, and it's pretty good. But so far, we haven't encountered any hazard yet. Other than that, I think one very important thing is the public participant warning systems. I think this works perfectly together with the early warning. So this is largely rely on the local residents. So since it's implemented in 2010, we have dramatically reduced the number of death toll and the number of people affected each year. So lastly, I talk about the knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer is what our program have been emphasized on. We have to, whatever we found, whatever we have been getting, we always try to pass on to the local residents. So each year, we enroll about 50 people from different countries, try to teach them what kind of technology we have used, how we conduct risk assessment, how we use it to pass on the knowledge to the local peoples. And of course, we do international conference. Does this work? I think one of the important output of this conference that all the international organization, university come together. We decided to set up this alliance on disaster risk reduction for the which will focus on the Silk Road areas. So we have tried to make our current work, the SiDDR program, to continue for the next 10 years. And we try to make use of the platform. So what kind of platform we are planning at? Firstly, for under Chinese Academy of Science, we have 9 overseas centers, which is supporting the low-cost education and the research. So this is widely distributed in the Silk Road regions. And in addition, we have one of the latest centers coming up. This is already under construction. It's located in Islamabad, Pakistan. The CAS is now invest in the laboratory, and as long as all the professors and researchers go there and try to support the whole regional development and the risk reduction. So besides the platform we are also decide what's our mission of our alliance. So we identify the 2 gaps. One is between the natural and social science. Another one is we try to bridge the gaps between the natural science and the engineering community, because due to the large infrastructure we try to identify in this Silk Road region. So with that, I think I will conclude my presentation, and thank you.